I'm joined by three incredible panelists. Bill, Yasmin, and Renee, in that order. Each has been a powerhouse, an innovative thinker, thought leader, courageous, daring, brave in their field of interest and their careers. They're recognized in their communities and nationally for the innovations they've brought to their field. Bill and I are sitting next to each other, and I don't know whether it's just former mayors are joined at the hip. But I'm delighted to have another former elected official on the panel, in part because it's so rare at conferences like this that you'd have a chance to talk to someone like Bill, who's been on the ground working post his mayoral time to make his community a better place. Yasmin has been an innovator in education and right here in Texas, and she's got lots of stories to tell us. I visited the school at Renaissance a few years ago when it was K to second grade, and it's really exciting yesterday to hear what's going on now, and so congratulations to you. And innovation in education is complicated and difficult, but certainly much needed, and we can see that from Patrick Sharkey's study and his research. So he made some points that I'm sure we'll build on. Renee Glover at the far end is a former executive director, president, CEO of the Atlanta Housing Authority. And when I was elected, Tom Cousins, who many of you heard about from Purpose-Built in Eastlake, said to me, if you can be as good as Renee Glover is at her job, then you will be successful as mayor. And that was his challenge to me. He gave me two challenges. One, that I should be as good and tough as Renee was in her position, and I should be as punctual as George W. Bush. So I tried to do both of those things. And Tom had a way of just kind of cutting to the chase and saying, these are the things you need to get done. So anyway, our panel discussion is a little weird. Our topic is a little weird because everyone is, even us are trying to figure out, okay, what is an intersector? You got any ideas? An intersector is someone who can cut across the sectors in a community, in a community, in a conversation. And so, as John Major has said, if you have made a particular kind of piece of equipment, like a hammer, what you know is the processes for making the hammers, the suppliers, the relationship of the equipment to the natural resources, to all of the materials that you need. And just because you can make a hammer does not mean you can make a sickle, right? Or that you can make a ladder. Each of these panelists have been successful both in their field of expertise, but beyond that, in areas outside of their expertise. They have learned things in their own field that have allowed them to move freely in other communities, in other sectors of society. Did I get it right, John? There you go. I used the hammer even. So I am thrilled that we can start anywhere here, but we're going to start all the way at the far side with Renee. Renee was the CEO of the Housing Authority after being a board member. So she started as an attorney and then moved to be a board member at the encouragement of the mayor at the time. And then from there to being the CEO. So she clearly was moving through roles and across sectors in that process. So we'd like you to talk to us just by example or experience. What tools, what experience did you have as in law that allowed you to move into the board position and then move into the CEO's role? And what sector, how did that cross sectors in the community that you were working in?
Well, thank you. And before I get started, I just want to brag a little bit about Shirley Franklin. She is just an incredible thought leader, and talk about a player across sectors. She absolutely is. And I will say this without fear of being contradicted, that she was one of the greatest mayors that we had in the city of Atlanta. And she laid the foundation for all of the magnificent things that will happen, not only in our current period, but for a very, very long time, because she knows how to bring the different sectors together. She's very effective. She's a brilliant woman. She is fearless.
No, that's plenty.
And,
I already gave her $10.
And yes, you're embarrassing.
I only gave her $10.
So here's the deal. When I was practicing corporate and corporate finance law, and by definition, one of the things that corporate lawyers do is that they bring people together and they solve problems. And so spent a lot of time in the real estate arena and the finance arena. So clearly, we know how to be board members, particularly as a corporate attorney, because that's who you are basically working with in a lot of cases. And governance is so hugely important, you can't believe, because it sets the tone. And if you get board members who actually provide strategic guidance rather than get into the mix of the day-to-day operations, you have an incredible opportunity there. So moving in as a member of the board was very comfortable, and God knows the Housing Authority, which had been chronically on the troubled list, and the properties were horrible, and it was just a complete mess. And the Olympics were coming to Atlanta, and we were announced, and Shirley was working on the committee to host the Olympics, the Centennial Olympics in Atlanta. And so we were awarded that privilege in 1990. The Olympics were going to occur in 1996. And we at the Housing Authority, this is when I was on the board, sold 2 acres of land so that the Olympic dormitories were going to be constructed literally right across the street from one of our most notorious projects. All of them were notorious because they all, unfortunately, growing out of a whole series of bad policy decisions and worse management, concentrated poverty and exhibited all of the externalities that you see in these types of situations. And these were not nuanced things. People were literally being killed, children were being murdered, and that type of thing. And it was horrible, and the conditions were incredibly bad. But with the Olympics, we had a tool that created opportunity because the world press was going to be living in the dormitories with the athletes. And so that was probably our single most powerful tool, because when we talked about change, we had this other tool called Hope 6. The great thing about Hope 6 is that it was a framework, and it was HUD's first toe in the water to deregulation. So they didn't have this overly prescriptive thing that says you had to do this, 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 and this. In fact, it captured Senator Mikulski's statement and at the time Secretary Cisneros' statement that we're going to toss the rules. And so it allowed local players to actually create a place where people who had choices wanted to be there. And so the policy decisions that had to be agreed upon by the feds, because this stuff had been cast in concrete for over 60 years, was, could something other than a housing authority own and operate units that were receiving a federal subsidy? So public-private partnerships were introduced in that equation. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about the importance of the public and private sector coming together in this arena, because we were really trying to generate, and I love Patrick's statement about durability. We were trying to create durable change. And so the structure of the partnership was to have the private sector developer be the managing general partner, so that all of the change that occurs, because the election cycle is completely inconsistent with a long-term strategy. So we had 2 presidents occur, changes. We had, I think, 3 secretaries change. We had several changes in mayors. And so you have all of this change and swirl going on. And you might ask, well, what does that have to do with the thing that you're trying to get done? And you can't change it in response to all of that political change. So structuring the partnership so that there was consistency, because I could have been removed anytime during that process. But we came together, we and our private sector development partners came together around this shared vision that we wanted to create this community of opportunity. And intentionally, we wanted to break the cycle of having all poor families living there, because all the feedback that I got when I was on board is, for God's sake, stop doing what everybody has done before you, because it has nothing to do with nicer windows, nicer roof, nicer building envelopes. It has everything to do with the fact that this is a broken system. So by introducing the private sector into the equation, who knows, by the way, how to develop communities of choice, we were making a major change, and we were saying to the larger public, we want to have a new model here. And guess what? If you didn't have market rate families or lower income families living there as a result of choice, you did not have a mixed income community. And if you don't have the higher income families there, the other consequential development that will occur won't come, because commercial developers are looking at the rooftops with the disposable income. And so you're building in these changes that will last and are durable, because the private players are signing guarantees, debt instruments, and those types of things. So getting the public and private players to understand what the value proposition is so critically important, because what you can't do is ask private players to come in and basically commit financial suicide. So on the front end, as the leader of the public entity, you have to take the time to structure the partnership so that everybody wins. So the public side wins, the private side wins, and the larger community wins, because you've got to survive these political changes that are going to occur. And you've got to have the regulator, that's HUD, win, because if they change all the rules midstream, there's no way that you can attract a private player to the table, because people are saying, well, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to sign a guarantee and find out that I can't manage and mitigate my risk. So it's important in these efforts. And by the way, we're now in version 3.0. So, while people are still debating, well, gee, should we break up this concentrated poverty? Guess what, folks? That train left the station a whole bunch of time ago. And the federal funding has been cut accordingly. And this affirmatively furthering fair housing thing is about, it's not saying it directly, we don't want to continue to support concentrated poverty. So for God's sake, if you're in the seat and you can actually force and drive some change, then you shouldn't be debating, well, gee, should I? Well, you got to do that, because guess what? All the funding, you're going to be sitting there with a property that you will not be able to manage and operate, because the vote on concentrated poverty is absolutely don't do it anymore and you better figure it out. But these public-private partnerships will indeed allow you to do that, and that is the future. And I'm probably over my allotted time,
No,
so I'm going to push it
It's a
to
good
the
start, yeah.
push it to the next one.
But we really, I mean, you can pick up on that, or you can come back. Let's go back to your story, Yasmin. How did you get into, I mean, charter schools are popular in some communities, not popular in others, and successful in some cases and not successful in others. How do you present what you're doing in a way that allows you to be innovative and forward-thinking at the same time you've got to answer all these questions?
Just as context for everyone, Uplift is the largest network of public charter schools in the North Texas area. We have 34 schools serving 14,000 students in grades pre-K through 12th grade across the Metroplex, with 2 physical campuses, Uplift Mighty and Uplift Meridian in Fort Worth. And so, Shirley, to your point around charter schools, I learned very early on, my original background is I came from the business community, and that's where I spent my first 9 years. And actually going from the business community to education reform was pretty seamless because education reform is all about being innovative, about valuing the big idea, being willing to be bold for the purpose of being able to serve underserved children in a bigger way, being willing to take hard looks at data and to use that to inform your decision making, and to be very, to always be seeking out the best minds to again work on behalf of our children. So that was a very natural transition for me. But what I learned when I hosted a dinner party for my husband's work colleagues at our home, about maybe a year or two in to being at Uplift, and I was explaining, someone had asked me at the dinner table what freedoms a charter school had, and all of a sudden one of the wives of my husband's colleagues got very silent, and then she became angry because her godmother was the head of a teachers union, and she was not favorable about the fact that charter schools do have a very important freedom around human capital, that if there's an ineffective teacher in our schools, of course we do everything possible to coach and support that teacher. But if that's not working, we do have the freedom to replace a teacher in the middle of a school year. And why I'm unapologetic about it, though careful in explaining that to individuals, is if it was your own child in a 3rd grade classroom and you had seen for an entire semester that they really had not learned anything, and we have that ability to track what academic progress our children are making, then you would want a different teacher in your child's classroom who would say, well, actually, you just go ahead and keep them in there for the rest of the school year. My child might still be at the beginning of a 3rd grade level when they go into 4th grade. I'm okay with that. I don't think most middle-income parents would be okay with that. And so the way I unapologetically lead Uplift is I'm trying to create a learning environment with the 14,000 children we serve that I'd want for my own 3 children. And so that is part of the balance, and I would connect that leap to this notion of being an intersector. So as a school community, we really are at the hub of many social services that could be provided. And very humbly, we know that even if we continue to put our children on a path to college, which Uplift's been very successful at, we humbly know that that is not enough. Our children need great housing to live in, the stability of housing. They need to have nutritious meals that they're getting outside of just our school building. They need access to health care. There are so many things that we can't provide, but because we do provide a physical building that our children in for so many hours a day, and a place that our parents feel safe and comfortable coming to, we do see it as our responsibility to leverage that space, to work with other organizations, to be a conduit to provide those services so we can meet the whole needs of of the children that we serve. I know later on we're going to talk about one of our partnerships that we have with a traditional district, which could seem like an unusual marriage of two partners. And when I speak about that, really kind of the headline on it is that I feel like when you go into an intersector relationship like that, you have to be willing to be flexible and really respect the other player, even though their background and context and how they lead their organization might be very different than your own. And we found that in our relationship with our traditional ISD friends, but we respect that difference and we're willing to make trade-offs and be flexible in how we view the world in order to make the partnership work. And they're equally doing that on their side. And so I think that whenever you try to seek out a partner that is so different, it's very easy for us to partner with Children's Medical Center to be able to provide health services in our schools, right? We're going to be naturally aligned. But when you're partnering with an organization that is structurally different than your own, you really have to make sure on both parties that they're going in with that flexible mindset, or else it could be far more complicated.
Thank you. So Bill, you're the cleanup hitter.
Well, good morning. I'm delighted to be here. My name is Bill Barnet, and I'm a 73-year-old businessman who retired, sold a business, got roped into being elected for public office, spent 8 years in the trenches in a small South Carolina community, and then got the bug to do something that I hadn't participated in at the time I was mayor, which was to take another part of our community with a group of people and try to change it. So I wrote down a lot of notes while planning for this conversation, and I've changed almost every one of my thought processes in the last 2 days. Late yesterday, somebody said, maybe it was Carol Naughton or a guest, that all you really need in this game is a billionaire and a very motivated professional. I've been thinking a lot about that last night over a beer, and I've come to the conclusion that that's not exactly right. I do think it's very fair to say that having a billionaire in your community and a very capable professional will get you somewhere. But there's an awful lot of other people that have to come, some perhaps kicking and yelling and screaming, to make the work that we're all talking about doing happen. So I would like to just sort of spend my time focused on something that maybe this conference needs to do a little more of, and that is, how do you get there? I mean, it's one thing for all of us to recognize that race is a huge problem in our society. We do know it. It's been accentuated in these conversations in the last 48 hours. But the real question is, how do we organize our communities around the resources and the skills that we have to change that place? And I want you all to know, and this might get Shirley upset, everyone in this room is not going to create an Eastlake. And you're not really going to go to Omaha like they are this Friday and break ground on a huge project, because most of you don't have the Buffett family in your community. What you're going to do is find a leadership group, a leader, and a group of people motivated by that leader to come together and to create a common vision and to go out and try to beat down all of the challenges that you have to create change. So to me, an intersector has certain qualities. An intersector has to be a leader in the community, and this is not my ego speaking, it's just what I believe to be the truth. On the way out here, I was talking with Mitch Kennedy, who I think is here, but I can't see a thing with those lights in my eyes. And I said, well, what do you think an intersector is? And Mitch is a great colleague, works with our city. And he said, you are an ESB. So of course, as we all learned yesterday at lunch, you got to figure out what all these numbers and letters mean. ESB to him was an executive silo buster. I think the reality is that what you need to find in your community to be successful, and what all of us have to do, whether it's in the Housing Authority of Atlanta or in a public arena in education, is to find a leader that can bring people together, create a common vision, make people understand why that vision is important to them, and then to go out and try to attract the resources necessary to make it happen. In our community, Spartanburg, we knew we had a very poor neighborhood. We had a neighborhood with about 50% of the houses that were condemned or foreclosed or unoccupied. An old mill village that had fallen apart when the mill had gone away. We also had huge poverty. 65% of the people in that area who lived there, once there were 5,000 people living there, now 1,700, most of whom were African American. That we knew that there was an enormous amount of poverty. We had one school that was struggling, 100% free and reduced lunch. Shirley's been there a few times. Our goal, obviously, as is the purpose-built goal, the East Lake goal, was to create a great economic environment, but to focus on education. But we realize, as has been said so many times in the last 2 days, that education alone won't hack it. You've got to create an environment where the kids come from and go home to safe environments, where they have support, where there's health services, all the things that we've all heard about. So our team started out a little differently. We went out to people in the community, and I mention this only because it's a unique approach. We went out to people in the community and said, we'll take you through this area. We want you to give us money, and we can't tell you how we're going to spend it. We went out and raised $2 million, either in gifts or in loans. And from some institutions, this is another takeaway, from some institutions that no one ever would have thought would have been approachable, or they themselves would never have thought of giving money to a third-party group that was trying to come together to create change. So, for example, we went to a college and said, we want you to lend us, in soft lend words, $250,000. We hope to pay you back in 5 years. And we think we're going to buy property before everyone knows what we're trying to do. But you don't have any control over the money. And they said, well, you got to be out of your mind. I said, no, we're really not out of our minds. This is an important part of our community, and you have a stake in it. And so one of the things we learned to do was to go to people who were non-traditional in our world and actually ask them to participate in a community-wide effort. So an Interceptor also has to explain why it is everyone's best interest to be interested in something that may not be right in their neighborhood. And you can talk about crime. I thought Alice, just an hour ago, asked the right question. You know, how do you create the story for the people in your community to make them believe that it is worth their while to care about your success and to contribute in some way? It works. So somehow in the next hour, I'd like to continue to sort of develop that theme. I think every community who wants to win will not have a Tom Cousins, will not build a new East Lake Drew Senior High School, but every community in this country, all 850 or however number Carol Naughton says we have, every community can do it if you can align yourselves behind a leadership team and make a cogent argument for success. I believe it, and I think we're going to do it in our community. I think you can do it in yours.
Not bad, huh? Good start. Yeah. Everybody has touched on this, and I want to go back to this for a minute, because I think, Bill, you have, and each of you really, have talked about a personal experience. I mean, what strategies do you use when you try to do this and it doesn't work? I mean, because you were able to raise money locally, does that mean you're able to get it from the federal government or the state government, or, you know, to leverage that $2 million to the $20 million that you need or might need? I mean, what are What do you do in that situation?
Well, I think something that both, I guess all of us have spoken about is this whole notion of shared vision. And I do believe that the larger community understands that when you have concentrated poverty and you have children being systematically destroyed, and I think it's important to tell the story in human terms and not use a lot of empty data and statistics, so that there's really a call to action. And so people actually care about what you're talking about. So changing the language, but also getting local players invested. And I think you can go to the feds and the state and say, we've got something going here, and we're going to be about the change, and we're going to be about the outcomes. And so when you start talking about creating communities, I mean, in Atlanta, we've created 16 mixed-use, mixed-income communities. The hardest part has been working with the schools, because these two systems don't work that well together, but where they work, the transformational change and impact is tremendous. So I think
So it's greater when you can work with the schools.
Oh, absolutely. And the fact of the matter is that you're not going to have the families who have choice, the more well-off families, coming to communities if the schools are terrible. And so being able to tell that story and then evidence, and I thought Patrick's talk this morning was so powerful, because you've got to have the validation of some outside party saying, yes, not only are we implementing the strategy, but we're seeing changes from it, but you can get everybody on board. And by the way, this is not a partisan issue. This really is about building long-term a stronger nation, because if you have these communities continue where people are completely disaffected and disconnected from society, you're going to see the Fergusons and all of the other types of situations occurring just because people have no hope. And so this is really about building a stronger society, and people will come to the table if they believe in that vision, and you've got to have all the stakeholders at the table and engaged and involved, and you can absolutely do it. And I agree with you. I don't think you have to have a billionaire. I think you've got to have many stakeholders invested in it, and then we've got to tell our stories to the federal folks who appropriate dollars. Not that you always need federal dollars, but if you can have those dollars leveraged by other private investment, the things you can do, the leverage can easily be at least 10 to 1 or better.
But you said you did 16 mixed income communities,
Yes.
all with federal investment.
Right, leveraging federal dollars.
Leveraging federal dollars.
Typically to the tune of 10 to 1.
And see, that's one of the challenges new communities who are tackling this bill are having, is that the federal dollars are dwindling. So the question is, how can someone with your skill set, any of you, I mean, how do you deal with that? I mean, what was possible in the 1990s and the 2000s using federal dollars may not be possible in a lot of the communities that are trying to do this work.
Yeah, I think it's, I have a little different take. I think the federal bureaucracy, and maybe there's somebody in the room, I'm about to hurt their feelings, is part of the problem. I mean, I think those of us who are trying to fix schools and fix housing and fix neighborhoods ought to be embraced much more openly by the federal bureaucracy. I'll give you an example. We created we have a food desert. Most of you are dealing with food deserts. And we created, with the help of some federal money, a cafe, a community garden, and we brought the wide community farmers market to this area. Try to bring people from high zip codes into the environment. And so there's a cafe and there's a retail store, and the retail store sells fresh fruits and vegetables and fresh things to the people in the community. We cannot get SNAP in that store because the folks are so successful with the cafe, they sell more prepared goods than they do retail goods. But 2 doors away, there's the only convenience store in the whole area, which is a liquor store, a convenience store. They sell cigarettes by the singles, and they have SNAP. So whether it's HUD, we're trying to daylight a creek, and the Corps of Engineers is giving us fits while EPA thinks it's the best thing that ever happened. So if you think that you're going to jump into this world and be embraced by a whole bunch of people who are set up to make you successful, I think you are a bit naive. I think it can happen, and I'm not saying all federal officials or state officials are bad. That's not even beginning to be my position. But there's a reality to the game we're all entering, and that is that everybody is going to embrace what you're going to do, whether it's the folks in the neighborhood or the folks who are set up by our tax dollars to try to make us successful. I mean, all we want to do is build housing and build a health center and build a community center and bring fresh fruits and vegetables to a community that has none of it. So you'd think everybody in the world would love us, but that isn't necessarily the case.
I guess I would emphasize that from a public education standpoint, it's really the state government we have to advocate more with than at the federal government level. For public schools, it's less than 10% of your funding comes from a federal level. And so if I think about purpose-built communities, most often those communities are probably going to look to try to bring in a charter school. Someone who, like Uplift's entire mission is to focus on low-income children and putting them on a stronger path forward than they were on previously. And so understanding your own state's environment for charter schools and what the per pupil funding looks like and how easy it is to get a charter, to keep your charter, how charter friendly your state is, that's actually from a public ed side where more the advocacy efforts are and the constraints are, candidly, than on the federal side.
But this dilemma of, that's been really kind of described by each of you. I mean, this challenge of working in an environment where people might buy the vision, but the rules and regs or the tradition or the procedures don't accommodate for this new vision. What do you do about that? I mean, that's why everybody's here, right?
Well, I think the one thing that has changed that is an opportunity for all of this is this whole notion of urbanization. So people are moving back to the city. And that's a huge opportunity because a lot of the folks who, the white flight and the middle class flight, they found themselves out in these suburbs and exurbs, and they said, what in the world am I doing out in here? Because, the cultural centers, the sports arenas, the theaters, all of the infrastructure is in town. And so as cities are now rebuilding, this is the opportunity to be, and there's got to be a constant advocacy effort in terms of let's retake the schools. And I do think charters, by the way, are the way to work around that because trying to go around the traditional bureaucracies is very difficult. And the thing that changed at the federal level in the housing arena was this whole moving to work thing. It has an interesting name, but it's basically deregulation. Basically saying, let the local players solve the problems, working with and across sectors to create community. So I think that by feeding into both the state and the federal level, all of this wonderful research that's saying, by the way, these things are making a difference with the citizens. I think that that's how you keep chipping away at it. But I don't think you stop your work while you're trying to change that. But you advocate with one voice saying, let's move some of these nonsensical prescriptive regulations out, both at the Fed and the state level, and in effect, they'll trust us, okay, that we're going to do the right thing, and then over-deliver and, you know, show that these things can happen, because all of these things have got to work hand in glove, or we as a nation are going to lose our competitive advantage, because we can't continue to support failing schools and concentrated poverty and think that these cities and our states are going to survive it, because we're not, and we're seeing evidence of that all around the country.
I want to go back to that. I mean, just give us an idea, Renee. I mean, you were the CEO for 17 years, 18 years?
19 years.
19 years. I mean, that's a long haul.
Yeah, oh, it is.
I mean, and the changes didn't start the day you got there. From the time that you knew you needed to change either federal or state policy or procedures, how long did it take? And just give us an example of 2 or 3 things that you had to do in order to make that happen.
Well, clearly, the Olympics helped us with the federal policy.
Okay.
And once the model was created for mixed-use, mixed-income communities, we were able to get legal changes made and policy changes. And because we invented the model, we were very successful in bringing in federal tax awards.
So that's 2 years?
That was 2 years.
But I want them to, but I mean, that's 2 years worth of work,
Right,
maybe?
2 solid years. I mean, we went up to DC, we and our private development partners, Egbert Perry and Richard Barron, we went up there at least every 2 weeks for 9 months solid, every 2 weeks. And we brought Olympic paraphernalia with us to remind the feds that, by the way, the Olympics are coming in July 1996. We got to have a decision. The decision was made, by the way, March 1996, so we were able to deliver the first phase, but we also got the approvals of demolishing and being able to do a mixed-use, mixed-income community at East Lake, which, by the way, didn't have a Hope 6 grant, but had a large grant that had to have the law changed so that it could be used as if it were a Hope 6 grant. And John Hope and John Egan. And then once we got the machinery moving, but that was 2 solid years.
Every 2 weeks?
Every 2 weeks. And then in terms of the state, because we had to have tax credits, because without the tax credits, you can't raise the private equity otherwise. We had to have a change at the state laws, and we said we don't want to set aside. We will compete on the merits, and so we were able to help them align their policies, and that took a good year of meetings on a regular, because people want to know, are you serious? Are you really about the change you're going to make? Are you just talking? Are you really prepared to put your body on the line? And by the way, nobody's going to give you any attaboys or attagirls as you're doing this. They're going to beat the heck out of you, as well as the press. But that's why you have to be focused on the outcomes, and these are critically important issues. I mean, when I got in that chair and saw how many kids were getting killed and families sleeping on the floor, and I went out there to see it myself, you know, and how many police officers said, "You can't go there." And I said, "Well, what do you mean you can't? It's too dangerous." This was the police department. Said, "You cannot go visit there, let alone somebody living there." And so you use all of that, and you just put the energy, and it's got to be a relentless, consistent effort. And that's why having some party that you know will be there over the period of time in order to deliver against the promise is important. Because, and the reason somebody asked me, why in the world did you stay 19 years? Well, we had done, about 10 years in, we had done half the portfolio. And families came to me and said, well, what about us? We're scared too. We take our kids to school in the morning and they're being shot at. What about us? And so I said, heck, I can't just walk out in the middle and say, well, you know, I've really done my best. I said, okay, we'll do it. And so we leveraged our deregulation agreement to get the other families out of that horror. But it takes dedication, focus, vision, consistency, and you just have to stay at it, and it can be done, and the feds will come along with you, but you've got to be telling a story, so you've got to have some type of consistent storytelling, education effort going on all the time, because there's still the naysayers out there who are afraid of change, either because they feel, well, gee, people who are moving from these properties are going to come out and destroy their communities. And, which, by the way, I always equated with when black folks were moving out of historic white neighborhoods and going in to integrate. It was the same type of prejudice. These folks are going to bring their low morals, their lack of energy and effort to destroy my community. And guess what? You know, we made it happen because we all know, and this was something that I said to people all the time, you've got to buy in and believe in the universal humanity of men and women, and you've also got to believe that all people have unlimited human potential. And if they have the right opportunities, that they can succeed, and in fact exceed most of the things that any of us care about. And that is true universally, and it will happen. And if I told you the stories about what has happened with families who got out of all of that horror and the things that they're doing, each of us would be blown away. And that's because of the unlimited, God-given human potential. And shame on all of us for not believing enough in that potential that we can't do the dirty work. Because this is dirty work, okay? Let's be clear. This is not something where people will love and embrace you because people don't like change. People basically have zero-sum game philosophies, and that if somebody else wins, somebody else is losing. This has all got to be about win-win.
So Bill, you've got a few years to go. I mean,
We do.
and that's part of the challenge of any role that you play in a community, isn't it? That if in fact we are looking for a quick solution, this is really not the work that you're going to get that. I mean, you're going to get some successes, and you have to celebrate those successes. But the long haul is really what we're all focused on here. I mean, that's what you're focused on in education.
I think, I don't know how many people in the audience know the real story of Eastlake and the first 4 or 5 years when Eva Davis and Tom Cousins were at it head to head. It's about trust. It's building trust. I actually think, this is personal opinion, what happened in Charleston, the heinous crime of Charleston, is so interesting because the families the next day forgave the young man who went berserk or did the terrible deed. They actually probably deserve the Nobel Peace Prize. But that's the work of Joe Riley over 40 years, having a relationship with the African American community where they trusted him and they trusted the system. That the system, that's so much different than Ferguson. We've done something in Spartanburg which I think is interesting, maybe instructive to the people in the room. And again, I'm trying to give you ideas that might inform your journey. We actually took a group of citizens who live on the north side about 2 years ago, 3 years ago. This was not my idea. And we hired an individual to instruct them in leadership skills. And we gave them all computers so that anything we saw, they could see. And if they wanted to communicate with us, they could communicate with us at any time. So if we had a presentation about a new housing concept on Street X, they'd see it when we saw it. So we were trying to build trust. And don't anyone in this room think that whether you're a billionaire, whether you're Tom Cousins or not, you can't run over Eva Davis. You can't do it. And you can't do it and be successful. So you've got to create, in at least my opinion, you've got to create a story that everyone in the community can feel is to their advantage to see as a success. There are tricks to the trade, and we're all learning them. I think we all also have to be totally honest with one another. when we make a mistake, and Carol Naughton said it yesterday, one of the failures that, that Eastlake has had, I think it is so refreshing when people just, that automatically and proactively tell you what it is they've done right and what it is they've done wrong. Because we can't learn by just smiling at each other for the few things that we've done right. I can't, I mean, I don't, and I hope Jerry, well, Jerry's not in this room because he's in another session. You know, we're not going to replicate what is in New Orleans because we didn't have Katrina. There is a different set of circumstances in every one of our communities, and if we're good, we bring together a group of people around us who have different skills than us and different views. We bring them together. We try to figure out what our assets are and what our liabilities are, where our resources are, what we have to do together, and then we try to affect that change. And if you think you're going to do it by yourself, you're just wrong. It just isn't going to happen. It's a team sport.
Yeah, so I wanted to just talk a little bit about building the trust with Eva Davis.
Yeah, well, you know better than I do.
So, in addition to running up to Washington, we had a weekly meeting, and Carol Naughton and I and Greg Gianelli, we went out there every Monday at 4 o'clock. And we met with her, we dealt with all the issues that were in her community, because you're right, we had to build trust. And I never forget when we finally got the approval to demolish the building, this is just by way of illustration, she said that she wanted the bricks from her apartment unit preserved so that they could be part of a plaque that we did eventually construct. So we had our private program manager get the bricks, put them on a pallet. We kept an ID on that pallet so that we could with honesty say, these are the bricks from your unit that we're going to use to build. And so I say all of that to say that it's hard. I mean, and you know, and we did make mistakes, but you know, they said the work orders aren't getting done. We set up a team to get that done. They wanted vouchers. We set up, you know, there was an issue about utilities. And so every single week, and I remember we closed the meetings out. Sometimes we've been cussed out. And we close the meeting out and say, well, gee, that was a great meeting. We'll be back next Monday and we'll pick it up. But that's what built the foundation of the trust so that we could keep coming back and get the buy-in. Because guess what? The one thing that we do know is that if we had not had her support, it would not have happened, period, in the story.
I mean, that's one of the stories that I tell, that clearly the Cousins Foundation and Tom and Ann Cousins are key players here. But also, you're now getting a chance to hear from Renee Glover. But the third part of that was Eva Davis. Mm-hmm. She did not have the advantage of a high school education. She did not have the advantage of a college education. She was low wage her entire life. But she indeed was a very savvy, experienced leader. And that at the point that the team that was working on this big vision recognized that, they had a chance to get it done. If they had ignored that, it wouldn't have happened. Not in Eastlake. It might have happened someplace else in Atlanta, but it would not have happened in Eastlake. So after one of the sessions a few minutes ago, well, the early session, I was standing in the hall with a colleague, and you know, there's a tendency when you have a microphone to give a speech instead of asking a question, right? It's just human nature. You got something to say. Well, you got to learn that that's okay. I mean, Intersector, someone who is looking to build relationships, has to set aside their assumptions of what is appropriate to be discussed in the meeting that has been called sometimes.
That's absolutely right.
And maybe all the time, right? And that the listening is as important as the speaking. And that's not easy to do. So I'll tell you, I mean, Bill said he wanted to give you some tricks of the trade. So I'm running for office, and I have been active in government and run the day-to-day operations of government for Andrew Young, who's mayor. And so I'm running for office, and there are 2 council members who are running for mayor as well. And they know about the legislative side, but they didn't necessarily know about the executive side of government. I knew nothing about the legislative side. I knew more about the executive side. So we'd have a panel discussion as a part of a forum. And the hardest thing during that year that I was running was listening to my opponents. Because I really didn't think they had anything to say that was relevant to the job we were running for, right? I liked them as individuals. So one of my tricks was that I got 3x5 cards in order to calm myself during these debates. I read Bible verses so that I would be calm enough not to respond, in an emotional way to what was being said or the circumstance. Now that sounds, it could be something else. Most people thought I had notes about my presentation, and it was just a series of Bible verses. And I would read the Bible verses just to calm myself down. I didn't need the notes to tell me the facts. I really needed the emotional calming that was necessary. When you are in an environment that is foreign to you, not the subject matter, but the environment is foreign to you, you have to adjust or sometimes find a touchstone. So the other one is I had fear of public speaking when I was running for office. And but I loved ballet as a child. So my touchstone for getting on the stage and presenting was as if I was at a ballet recital. I would emotionally put on kind of a point of view. I would talk to myself about how I would stand if I was about to dance, how I would present, where my arms would go, all related to ballet. Now, I was not dancing on the stage, but I was using this as a touchstone in order to help me in this foreign environment. And as an intersector, it's not just good enough to have the right answer or a big vision. You also have to have the style of presentation, the presence of presentation that allows people to listen to what it is you are going to say. And then you have to learn to listen, which is really the hardest part for everybody in this room, because we know so much about and we have so many opinions. So the listening might be the hardest part. Maybe you, Yasmin, have the better approach on this, because as an educator, you are constantly observing and listening to children and faculty. So maybe you ought to talk to us a little bit about how we develop our listening skills.
I don't know if I'm a good person to talk.
Go right ahead.
I think maybe that came more from my consulting background in the early years, and that definitely did apply transitioning over to Uplift. You can't be successful as a consultant if you're not listening to your clients and really understanding their viewpoint and what it is, the specific problem that they are trying to solve. And so that's how I would translate that lesson over to our partner organizations, of just whenever we're in a tense moment, making sure I truly understand their viewpoint and what are they trying to accomplish.
And so you give them the benefit of the doubt?
Yes, I think you have to assume positive intentionality. Everyone is trying to do the best thing for their organization and their constituents, even if it's different from the way you would approach the work. Otherwise, I don't think you can authentically work with another party if you don't at least respect their viewpoint, even if you don't agree with it.
Well, that's a good place to end. I don't have a watch. I lost it on the plane coming, so I don't know what time it is. But John has told me that we don't have any more time. We do want to thank all of you for coming, and we want to thank our panelists for a lively discussion. Thank you.